Good evening.
Oh, geez, yeah, we always run
Thank
into
you
each
for
other.
joining us this evening. We're so excited because we have another mystery that's going to be solved for us this evening. We're just learning all kinds of exciting things. I'm excited because you're all here, and also to have Al House with us. But I'm also excited because I live in and own with my mother a DuPont house on East 3rd Street. And it's one of the ones that stayed, not one of the ones that disappeared mysteriously. So I'm really looking forward to learning all about this story. In 1921, over 100 houses, or maybe Al will correct us on that, disappeared, and he's going to explain to us how this happened, why, what, and whatever. This series, which we're very excited about also, because it really brings out the locals, and that's really an awful lot of fun for all of us. It's made possible through a grant from the Wisconsin Humanities Council with funds from the Mayhead Fund of the HRK Foundation. The Wisconsin Humanities Council supports and creates programs that use history, culture, and discussion to strengthen community life for everyone. This series is a joint venture between the Washburn Heritage Association and the Washburn Area Historical Society. This evening's event is hosted by the Washburn Area Historical Society, and the hospitality is courtesy of the board members and supporters, so we thank them. Also, Phil Anich is here to share his great talents with us. After the show, he'll be playing for about 30 minutes, and his participation is sponsored by Ken and Jane Weiler. So without further ado, here's Al House.
Thank you very much. The last time I did one of these, I think it was 2.5 years ago, it was 98 degrees out. Now we're getting sub-zero weather tonight, so we're doing the extreme. Well, I titled my talk, How the DuPont Edition Became Morley Heights, but before we get into it, I'd like to show you my mental state when I was first asked to do this. I thought I had been thrown to the sharks. But these things tend to prevail and work out, and with the thanks to the Washburn Heritage Association, the Washburn Historical Museum and Society, who are acclaimed, Duluth Public Library, the Northeast Minnesota Historical Museum, and especially you, the audience, it somehow came together. And I'm going to take you back a couple of years. Remember the bad winter of 2014? Well, it was bad for us too, because my son was a freshman in college, and we were smacked with the ridiculous cost that they charge for dormitories. So after suffering through it the first semester, we started saying there's got to be a better way. And so he wanted to get out of the dorm, and so we thought, well, what we'll do is we'll find a house to purchase, and then he can live there, we'll fix it up, get a permit, and rent the other bedrooms out. And so that's what we did. We found this little house up on the hill in Duluth and purchased it. Well, little did we know that began its life in Washburn, Wisconsin. As we got into tearing apart the bathroom and the electrical wiring, which was another story, we found a DuPont stamp on one of the structural members and a torn Washburn newspaper shoved into the wall, because back in those days when they built these, they actually used newspaper for insulation. So that got us digging around, and what we found was that the whole, pardon the poor picture quality, but we discovered that the whole neighborhood was moved from Washburn to Duluth in 1921 to 1922, which leads to all sorts of questions. Why, how, who, and whatever for. Well, why you need to go back to 1917. You know, it was a time of great change in the United States. We were coming out of isolationism. We had entered World War I underarmed and unprepared. To give you an idea, I don't think the United States Army had one tank, and its largest artillery piece was 75 millimeters compared to the monster armaments that the European powers were using. The U.S. had some catching up to do. So the U.S. embarked on a massive armament program, including productions of millions, yes, millions of tons of explosives. And that affects Washburn in a big way. At that time, DuPont Barksdale was the largest explosive plant in the US at the time. It's my understanding it had been chosen that location because it was equidistant between the iron ore mines in Michigan and the ones on the Mojave Range, so that they could supply both equally well. But immediately, they quadrupled their production goals, leading to over 6,000 new workers at the Barksdale plant. Needless to say, housing then becomes critical. Matter of fact, what this is, barracks are built, and these are some of the single-story, most of them were two-story, but barracks are built for single workers, but more housing is desperately needed. What follows is a building craze in Washburn. Starting in 1917, Washburn's population more than doubles in a few months. New homes are being built almost nonstop. At least 40 that they know of in 1917, probably more. This culminates in 1918 with 100 new homes built for workers and their families. And indeed, some of these homes are the backbone of Washburn's neighborhood today, and many of them are still here. And it was a time of big change for Washburn. Obviously, the town was booming. And this was, to say that this was a time of plenty in Washburn would not be an understatement. Where these homes come from? Well, enter a new industry. In Bay City, Michigan, of all places, prefab home builders had sprouted up. It started with Aladdin Manufacturing, whose homes were actually manufactured by Lewis Manufacturing for a couple of years, then they got into the business themselves. And basically, you just added nails. And architectural surveys of Washburn have shown that some Washburn house types have been identified as coming from Lewis Manufacturing. And these are just two of many choices that are available in their 1916 catalog, the Vallejo and the Sylvan. Both of them look somewhat familiar to me driving around either Morley Heights or Washburn, if you look at them. And I think there definitely is a lineage there. Where were these homes located? And I apologize for the poor quality of the photograph, but most of the homes in 1918 were boundaried by 5th Avenue East, Superior Avenue, Bayfield Street, and including 3rd Avenue. So 5th Avenue East, you have Bayfield Street going here, and then you have Superior Avenue. So this area here, there's the nursing home and the old hospital, so it gives you kind of an idea of where they were. Now, how far extended either way, I can't really tell you. I looked, but I haven't been able to find anything. Which brings up a point. This is a new talk. There are people in this audience who probably have anecdotes and lore about these houses that would be wonderful to add to this. And hopefully maybe down the line somebody can give this talk again and add that. But if you do have information, it'll be a wonderful thing to share it with the Heritage Association so that we can find more details about this. Well, many of these houses, it was commonly called the DuPont Edition. And while many of these houses never had a chance to be lived in, and some were still incomplete when that terrible thing called peace breaks out. November 11th, 1918, the armistice is signed ending World War I. Almost immediately, the majority of Barksdale employees are let go. Washburn goes from, and the estimates vary all over, but probably more than 7,000 residents to 3,500 or less in a matter of weeks. You have 100 brand new houses. Now, this is open conjecture. It might be up to 100 brand new houses in East Washburn stand empty. And this is just a old copy of a photograph of the DuPont plant in its heyday. Okay, 12 months later, what happens to those houses? This is the November 20th headline for the Washburn Times, and it's DuPont houses are reported sold. It's reported that the Marshall Wells Company in Duluth has purchased up to 100 houses from DuPont. The intent is to move to Duluth to provide houses for their employees. They are to be disassembled and shipped by water or rail to Duluth. One thing, I almost added another newspaper clipping, not because it had anything to do with the study or the talk, but because they found it fascinating that that year, Bayfield farmers had bought 3 railroad cars full of explosives to blow stumps. But I couldn't figure out a way to fit into the talk, so I didn't add it. And now, week before, in Duluth, it had been big news. This is from November 11th, 1919 Duluth Herald. And as you can see, Marshall Wells Company buys 100 houses at Barksdale, Wisconsin, will move them to Duluth, be sold to employees of the company. Let's see, dwellings completed by DuPont Powder Company just before end of war will be placed on Marshall Wells property at Morley Heights. And structures may be freighted or brought here by, on scows or brought here by rail. What did I just do? Oops. I just did something wrong. And he's gonna have to bring me back. The magic of electronics, thank you. Okay, and you can't see it all, and I tried my darndest to get a full copy, but I couldn't. But what this says is 100 houses are purchased for Duluth was the banner of the Duluth Herald that day. What is Marshall Wells? Well, it's November 20th. Marshall Wells had become the largest hardware distributor in the United States based out of the harbor area in Duluth. It was located in the port section. Interestingly enough, down the line, it became part of coast-to-coast hardware post-World War II. But at this time, it was a large structure, and this is part of it, and it was added on here at a later date as well. As a matter of fact, the reason for it was that the Duluth was growing to support the booming Mesabi Iron Range, and even the end of World War I hadn't slowed that down. And housing was needed, as it had been at Washburn, fast. And they were having trouble attracting employees, so to attract employees to move there, Marshall Wells decided to buy housing and sell at a good price to employees.
Marshall High School is named after that family.
You probably see that the building is somewhat familiar, and that's it today. So today, the Marshall Wells warehouse is home to Red Lobster, Old Chicago, Timberlodge Steakhouse, Sweets Hotel, Famous Days, and Fun Zone. So you can put on 100 pounds and play baseball. And one thing I noticed is the two water, whoops. Oops, you want to do that? There we go. The two water towers are still there. But it is a kind of a historical building. If you ever stayed at the Sweets Hotel, it's kind of interesting inside. The way it's designed, you have these huge columns going through the middle of rooms and whatnot that they couldn't move. But anyway, the removal started, and it started January 18th, 1920. Washburn Times talks about the dismantling of DuPont houses. It reports that a crew of 10 men are starting, and it will be accomplished by fall. It was a somber article too. You go into detail on it. And it was clear that the hope was that Washburn would find some way to keep and fill these houses with families. And I think a lot of dreams were dashed. I mean, you have a town that's 7,000 going down to 3,500. It's got to be a difficult thing for the merchants and for everyone else in the social fabric of the town. And hopes for the community growth, unfortunately, were put on hold. Back down to about 3,500 people, according to Larson, the historian. And it probably was the last real boom time for Washburn, and the following economic dislocation was one of the worst in the city's history, especially as it was only a few years later that the Great Depression also hit the whole country. And the town had to live with the deserted sidewalks, empty home foundations of the former DuPont addition for many years, because when they take those houses off, they just left the foundations. This picture was taken in 1939, which is what, 18 or 19 years later. And as you can see, it's just pretty much still there. Nothing's been done with it. And to give you an idea where this is, that is the path of present Highway 13 going towards Bayfield. So I would say probably over in this area is the hospital, and kind of gives you a schematic of where things are. It took that long for people to start buying that property and rebuilding with new housing to replace what had been removed. Now, for Marshall Wells, the challenge is to move the houses 72 miles and rebuild them promptly. Now, this is just Google Earth, but I put put Washburn here, and that's where they were being moved to. You had a choice. You could take rail, you could take water, and there's even some anecdotal reports that they were thinking about doing it over the ice during the winter. But I kind of doubt that, because anybody who's ever been out in this area on a snowmobile during the winter realizes that the ice is more up and down than it is flat, due to all the pack ice. So it was either water or rail, and then again, here's Marshall Wells in Duluth, and it had to go up the hill to Morley Heights. How were they moved? It gets confusing with planes by water, over ice, and by train. What added to the confusion was an article in the Lake Voice, which is UMD Journalism Department magazine in 2011, claims they were brought across the water, referencing the above Herald article. That same article claims that they were moved from Barksdale, not Washburn, which means the author's research was questionable at best. Over lake ice, like I said, would be difficult if not impossible. Lars Erik Larson, who I don't know if you've ever read his history of Washburn, he probably is the definitive history of Washburn. In 2008, states that this is an error and they were transported by rail. And you think about it, it makes much more sense, as the Omaha line was less than a mile away, and there were connections to bring it to Duluth. So, pretty confident that that's the way they're transported. I searched and searched, but I couldn't find any pictures or photographs or sketches or anything of the transportation of the houses. How were they moved? Again, we talked about that a little bit. But another thing that provides evidence as railroad is the photos show that they were knocked down at the time of reassembly. And if that's so, rail's the best bet, then, because they're talking about moving, I think, whole pieces by scow. And again, the Herald article also led to that's where they're coming from. And that's historical inaccuracy, as you can see, continues perpetuated to this day. Now, where were they going? This was in the original Herald article, and it's a rough schematic of the proposed Morley Heights neighborhood. That is a cross street. This is Livingston here, and this is now, I believe, it's Glenwood. And Morley Heights was kind of fanned out from that corner, which was one of the highest corners in Duluth, down to the southeast, down the hill. The house we bought is right there, just to let you know. And this is the plot from our original deed, by the way, which makes for some interesting reading because it dates from 1922. And again, it fans out. This is a park. This is Morley Heights Park. And this is Spear Avenue right here. And we're that house right there. And it's a little more active than the previous one. Give you an idea what it looks like today. This is the corner again, and it fans out. And there's the park. That green thing, I think, is an alien mothership that comes once every 6 months. I have no idea what it is. It's obviously a well-populated place nowadays. Now, when they started reconstruction in 1921, this is a Spear Avenue photo. And as you can see, they took the houses and they didn't completely disassemble. They take them down, they take the walls and then just kind of fold them like a box, you know, flat, and then transport them. And as you can see, they just kept on building. That one right there is the house that we ended up purchasing, by the way. And it was kind of cool to look at when it was being built. And down there is where the park's going to be. And if you look the other way on Morley Heights Parkway, this is what you saw. And what you're seeing here are the duplexes, because a substantial number of the houses that were transported, torn down, were duplexes. And they have some unique architectural styles that are almost a signature of them, and that there's some of them in Washburn to this day as well as Morley Heights. So anyway, they got them constructed, and the employees moved in, and everyone lived happily ever after, right? Well, not exactly. 4 miles up and down hill with no trolley service to get to Marshall Wells was the problem. And you've all seen the hills in Duluth. Very few employees took advantage of the offer, which was really good. The employee paid 10% of the cost of land and house up front, and 1% per month of the remainder of the amount until paid off, which if you work it out, would take approximately 7.5 years and they'd own the house outright. Instead, most were put up for auction in 1922, including the house we bought, for a minimum of $5,000 with the same terms as above, which must have been a good deal back then, even because they were all sold. A current day Morley Park, this kind of gives you an idea of what it is, and it's a bad picture, but right there's a little placard. And you look closer, this is what they talk about. 1919, the Marshall Wells Company, which operated the largest hardware warehouse in the nation, established a neighborhood for their employees on a wooded hillside overlooking Lake Superior. This development became known as the Morley Heights neighborhood. The company purchased the duplexes and homes from the DuPont company in Barksdale, Wisconsin. The homes were taken apart, transported across the lake, hauled up the hillside and reassembled. Prior to the relocation to Duluth, the houses were inhabited by DuPont company munition plant employees in World War I. Well, it's a nice placard, but they should have done their research. Maybe they would have a better story. But it is very nice, and it's very neat that they acknowledge that. And it is a neat neighborhood. It's, and the housing styles that went into it and who designed them. The American Craftsman and American Forest Square are both two types of the duplex that you'll see a few examples in a moment. And then again, the Lewis Manufacturing Company, it's been verified that both the Harrison design and the Vallejo design from their catalog are sitting on the hill. Give you an idea again, the Vallejo, the Sylvan, and the next one, these are what get me. This is the Winetta and the Trevor. The Winetta's price was $582, by the way. If you really wanted to go big, the Trevor was $685. So, like I said, the cost of the houses were substantially different than they are in this case. Now, present-day Morley Heights homes and duplexes. Again, I talked about the American Forest Square. This is an example. And I believe this one is the American Standard. And they're popular for duplexes because you can pack a lot of space into a small, relatively rectangular blueprint. One thing too to mention is you're going to see a lot of the covered porches here. When these houses were originally built, none of them had covered porches. The whole concept was to have open porches in order to develop a community feeling among the neighborhood. But living on a hillside in Duluth, I think all of a sudden reality intruded and everybody figured it was a lot nicer to have a covered porch to get rid of your overshoes and everything rather than doing it in 40-mile-an-hour winds and -10 wind, degree Fahrenheit. Approximately 25% of the Morley Heights houses are duplexes. And it is a quiet neighborhood. It's progressed from a residential neighborhood to mixed residence and student rental housing. Many different housing styles and many, like I just said, have been modified many times since the move. And again, this is an example of a single-family bungalow and a few other different types of the duplexes. Very attractive neighborhood. It's not a high-end neighborhood, but it certainly has been kept up nicely, which I think points to the pride that a lot of the residents have with their houses there. Many individual housing styles. When you drive around the Morley Heights area, you can actually tell the area easily by the styles of the houses. You go to the north of it, and they're very large, ornate houses, obviously more upscale for that time. You go down the hill from it and to the north, and you run into a lot of 1940s and 1950 Rambler style, as opposed to these. So it definitely is architecturally a unique neighborhood. They have many different bungalow styles, which I'm not going to go into details, but some are side gabled, some are front gabled, some are hip roofed. You name it, there's a lot of different styles. Now inside DuPont House in Morley Heights, we'll just arbitrarily pick this house at random, mainly because I have a key for the front door. the light in the photographs, I couldn't get it any lighter. But again, you know, they added the front, the enclosed porch to the front rather than have the open porch. Interestingly enough, and you have to talk to Therese about this, because she and Ryan, I was having some back issues at the time, and by the way, that's what the chair's for. I had back surgery 2 weeks ago, so if I need to sit down, you'll know why, okay? But they spearheaded the remodeling, and they tore up the carpeting that had been there since probably 1970s, maybe the 1960s. Found out that the floors probably had never been refurnished since it was assembled. So it was an adventure, but they did a really nice job, and the houses are really kind of neat. They're simple, but they're well built, and you can see what the floors look like after refinishing. You know, you think about it now with the cost of natural wood flooring. These were maple floors that were put in. It's absolutely beautiful to this day, and at the time they're probably the cheapest thing they could find. But you know, the plaster walls and ceiling, the electrical wiring was the original knob and tube, which we've since replaced, seeing as we didn't want to have a fire in the middle of the night. And interestingly enough, the floors on the ground floor are maple, but the ones upstairs are Douglas fir. So not a little more rougher finish, but not quite such detail. But they are simply but solidly built, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. Nothing out of the ordinary, but certainly serviceable. There's a lot of history in this neighborhood. You know, for a little neighborhood that just came out of the blue, a lot of history, and I doubt if half the residents in the neighborhood even know about it. And this gives you some idea of the different duplexes. This is actually one of the rougher looking ones I picked, but there are a lot of them that are built like that. There's like whole rows of duplexes. And then this is the view that from the top of the hill. And interestingly enough, even in the house we bought, there are certain places you can see Lake Superior. So a lot of the houses have lake view because you're so high up the hill. And again, people take a lot of pride. They've kept up the houses in a very nice way and really done a nice job. And there's all sorts of different styles, and like I said, they've been added to. So anyway, Washburn's gifted Duluth. It's a pleasant, quiet neighborhood of bungalows and duplexes in a very attractive part of Greater Duluth. A good place to live and raise a family. In retrospect, it really was good that these houses with some unique historical significant architecture styles from the early 20th century were not torn down and wasted. Because they are nice houses, and it is a cute little neighborhood. If you ever get a chance, I'd suggest just put Morley Heights on your GPS and go drive around. So Washburn's loss was definitely Duluth's gain. And I'd like to stop here and just say, I searched hard for everything I possibly could, and I'm sure there's some holes that if I give this talk 5 years from now, that I'd probably fill some of them in. But that's what I have as of now, and I'll open it to questions. Yeah, back in the corner.
Have you ever heard of Hunter's Park in Duluth?
I'm sorry?
Hunter's Park in Duluth?
Yeah.
I believe that there are DuPont houses in Hunter's Park.
Really?
Also.
I've never been able to find that
I never
information.
heard of Morley's Heights until you told this story tonight. I lived in Duluth for around 30 years, and I always was told that Hunter's Park
Really?
had DuPont houses.
Now, I just wonder if Morley Heights Park might have been named Hunter's Park at one
No,
time.
this was in the latter years.
Okay, where is Hunter's Park exactly?
I think it's off Woodland.
Okay, it's very close.
Yeah, I know it would be close.
Yeah, it's very close. And it might very well be. And by the way, one thing too is that I didn't mention is while they were planning to take 100 houses, the reports from Duluth is that they only brought 76.
Okay.
So it might very well be, and it might be that if they had open lots, that they put some of them there.
I have another item too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I do not have the documentation with me tonight. I can't put my hands on it. We had a cottage down on Birch Grove Road in Barksdale from 1932 until 1985 or something. The house came from Washburn, It was a Barksdale house.
Oh.
My father bought it for $100.
Wow.
And he had to have it moved off the lot by April 1st of 1932.
Okay.
He was an electrician for the P&A Coal Dock in Ashland or C. Rice, I can't remember which. And so he went on top of the house with a big pole and lifted the electrical wires so they could just keep on going. On the old highway, you know, down along Thompson's Creek. And
It wasn't a metal pole, I take it.
no, it was wooden pole, yeah. And then, he had already built the foundation down there on Birch Grove Road and set the house on it. The house next door to ours was also a DuPont house. So that's two that I know
Okay.
of. I was gonna say something else in that regard too. Anyway, I might raise my hand again.
Well,
And
thank
when I
you.
find the receipt or whatever of that, Al, I'll make sure that you get it.
That would be great. As a matter of fact, I think I'd probably give it to the Washburn Heritage Association.
Well, I've gotta find
They
it
need the
first.
people to provide it. But thank you so much for that.
I'm Mary Hudson, by the way.
That, you know, that's interesting because obviously not all these houses made the journey to Morley Heights.
Oh,
Maybe.
I know what else I was gonna say.
Okay.
The house used to sit, I checked in the courthouse, and the lot that our cottage sat on here in Washburn is where, you know where Tim Cook lives?
Yeah.
To the left of that, as you're looking at Tim's house, where Dean and Heidi built their second house, that was where our cottage used to sit. So
Really?
I don't know what street that is, but it's right by the nursing home. So it would fit in with your
That
story
would
there.
make sense. Okay, neat. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
My dad worked at DuPont, and he said that they did take some on the ice, but they used, I guess, horses, and then they had long logs, much wider than the houses, and they'd have to keep moving the logs from back to
Oh, okay.
And I don't know how many they moved that way, but some were moved that way. And in Superior, there was an area of small DuPont houses, not the nice big ones, but just like one-story houses.
Really?
There aren't any there now. I think they're almost all gone. But when we go to Duluth, we pass those houses.
Now,
My
this is
dad
what I
had to go
mean
to the
about
doctor
history.
a lot.
The more you learn, and the more reports from people whose families actually lived the history, the more you can fill in the blanks. Any other questions? Yes?
I've always heard that the area to the east of the nursing home, to the east of where Brenda Erickson's home was, has foundations of houses in there. Is that part of where these houses came from?
You know, I don't know. Can anyone address that?
There were east, they said Superior Avenue.
Foundations that we used to play in. And the one that's right close to our house, when we were just kids, but my mother grew up in the house that we were in, and she always told me that, and I don't know if this is what she told me, the house that you're coming into Ashland, it's a big house and it has dog kennels on it, but it's a big two-story
Oh,
house.
Blue Ribbon?
Probably, that house was the house that
Yeah,
was
my daughter just got
biased.
groomed there yesterday.
So, and there were, we used to play, there's lots of foundations in and around that area, and that's fun. Stuff from that.
Really?
Yep.
Phil?
I was told years and years ago that Buster Kelly's house, the one that's kind of behind the DuPont Club, that he bought that through a Montgomery Ward's catalog.
Sears.
Sears. So that,
Yeah,
so there were more than one company that was
right.
selling prefab houses.
He bought it from Montgomery Ward's, he brought it from a Ward, it's from Montgomery's.
No, they said Sears.
It was for sure
Here.
Sears.
I assume there were more than 100 houses in Morley Heights. Or did they all come from?
You know, not really. I drove around it, last week as much as I could. And I would guess there's probably somewhere between 75 and 80 houses. It's not a huge gigantic neighborhood. And I think what happened is it didn't completely fill up perhaps the whole neighborhood on the original building, because you get down towards the bottom of it, and the style of architecture of the houses changes markedly. So, let's see, Jack.
Yeah, in that picture from 1932, I think it was, where you showed all the empty foundations.
1939.
Whatever became of those, were they eventually built upon then?
The
We
article,
don't have empty foundations now.
the article that I referenced with the picture was in the Washburn Times. And it talked about how the area was finally, some of the foundations are being torn up, and other people were building houses in that area for the first time. So I saw him.
Back here.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the fact that there are dormitory foundations across the road from the DuPont plant between the Boy Scout and the row of houses? There's foundations in there from the dormitories.
It does not surprise me.
Yeah.
You could do a whole talk on those barracks alone. They had barracks enough at the DuPont plant at that time that they housed 2,000 single men. So, I mean, that's a lot of barracks. Actually, I probably should have included some pictures of them in there, because they had any number of different types of barracks, and they had packed them up quite extensively. Any other
I
questions?
think what happened is two
Well, I just want to thank you for being a great audience, and I want to thank the audience for educating me, because I learned a lot more in the questions than I had known before. So thank you very much.